wanted to start. You wrote a blog post recently about the Sequoia Capital RIP, memo. And you said some pretty scathing things there. Maybe you could repeat them here for this audience and talk about that. There's been a lot of concern here about what is the impact of the downturn.
Sequoia are my partners, so I'll moderate my tone.
Oh, come on, you're already on the record.
But I'm already on the record, yeah. No, but because I think Sequoia panicked, and they sent out this memo that I felt to their companies, that I felt, and they had a gathering of their companies, which I felt, I just contrasted on the blog what Allen and Company, which is to me some of the smartest investors in the world, the people who organize also the Sun Valley conference, and Herb Allen warned me a year before Sequoia how bad things were going to get. And so I just felt that the advice of Sequoia, but also in a much more polite, when you deal with investors, financial investors, and they have to give you bad news, it's kind of also almost like going to the doctor, They're going to tell you you have something really wrong, but there's ways and ways of telling things, right? So there was Allen and Company warning us that we were going to go through very difficult times to cut our burn rate, which we did at Fund, from like 1.2 million to 270,000 euros this month, and hopefully we'll be profitable next year. But it was painful to lay off, maybe 40% of the people at Fund. And it was also poorly perceived at that point because nobody was doing any layoffs and nobody was cutting their burn rates. But I am thankful to Allen and Company because they warned us a year before Sequoia. So then when Sequoia came with his memo, get real or go home, I was like, guys, we need financial investors who are savvy enough to warn us, why did these other guys know a year before what you only know now? So that was my criticism.
I also thought it was kind of interesting, the advice to be sort of cash efficient. That should be something that every entrepreneur is doing all the time, good times or bad.
Well, not really. I'll explain. I think the markets have more, well, I don't believe in markets. Let's begin with that. I believe that markets are like bipolar, and they overemphasize good times, bad times. They exaggerate, they exacerbate. I believe that an entrepreneur has to distinguish price and value, which I know value is more of a philosophical concept, but I think entrepreneurs should somehow steer in the middle and of the tremendous swings of the market, which are unreal on both ends. But what happens is there are times when markets are willing to give entrepreneurs almost absurd amounts of capital, and there's other times which their denial is absurd. And so it's very difficult for entrepreneurs to navigate these. So a company like Fund that needed to become the largest Wi-Fi network in the world, at first we needed to subsidize the Foneras and give them away for free, because the first people who shared Wi-Fi, they said, why do I share? Nobody shares with me, why should I share? Right. So we say, okay, well, we give you the router for free. At least that was something to get it going. And that required a lot of capital. In a market like today, we couldn't start Fund. But Fund now is the largest Wi-Fi network in the world, but they wouldn't give you the money to do Fund right now. So
when the capital was available, that was the time to take it. Sure,
we took it. But when I realized that it wasn't going to be available anymore, we made the cuts we needed to do. And then I advised also other entrepreneurs, friends of mine like Loic Lemer and other people. I said, look, guys, times are tough. We're like in 2001 mode again, 2002. It's not that capital is completely unavailable, but it's scarce. It's not like in 2007, 2006, and you're going to have to make your funds last and just grow more slowly in the next years.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about free, and one of the things I'm curious about, a lot of the web phenomena are driven by contribution. And you're asking for a different kind of contribution than a sort of a content network or something like that. You're actually asking people to share their bandwidth. And I was sort of curious, do you see differences as you're spread worldwide in the willingness of people to do that kind of sharing?
Yes, and I mean, we've seen differences. For example, we clearly have seen that the Japanese are the most giving people in the world vis-a-vis phone. And when we ask Japanese people why they like phone so much, and when we ask somebody in Germany, let's say, why they like phone, in Germany, people think that they save money with phone because they don't pay roaming, and they think of the benefits they get. And the same is true actually almost all over the world as in Germany. But in Japan, people see phone as an act of giving to their neighbors. I give Wi-Fi to my neighborhood. I make my neighborhood a better place. So the concept of giving, sharing, and in the States is the country, at phone we have the Bills and the Linuses. The Bills share and make money with phone, and the Linuses share because they want to make the world a better place. Well, in America, we have the highest proportion of bills, okay, of people who want to make money. So yeah, we've seen actually interesting cultural differences. Europe has more Linuses. It reflects the reality in the world, I think.
Really fascinating. Have you ever thought about publishing any of that data? It'd be great.
No, you're right. I should write at least something. I don't want to offend anybody.
Oh, it's all right.
But
offending people is.
But
part of it's because it really helps us to illuminate national character. It's funny. I remember reading this fabulous essay by E.M. Forster called "The English Character." It's written 100 years ago, and yet anybody who reads it will recognize the English character there. And I think there is a national character, and some of the behavior of social media actually teaches us about that character. And it seems to me that the more we can share that knowledge, it's actually useful, for example, for an entrepreneur who wants to come from one culture to another, or how do you adapt your marketing messaging from one culture to another. There's a lot of useful value there.
No, and if you think about it, America was a country of bills that they tried so hard to be bills that now they're all becoming Linuses. It's like national, now everybody, their home is owned by the American government. The American government is the largest owner of their banks. It's like, well, quite a socialist country now.
Yeah. 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 So, how do you spend your time? You're obviously, you're from South America originally, now living in Spain, but you travel a lot all over the world. Tell us about your life.
Well, it's tough to manage my time. I would say I also have 4 children and my girlfriend, and it's a lot of things to juggle in my life. But I think I manage because I have a good teams of people. Like in my holding company, we also do other things. We finance this company, Eolia, that was started up my holding company, which is now worth 600 million euros, and it develops wind farms and solar farms. And I also teach at the university. And when people see the things I do, they probably think that I either work all day, never sleep, or that I'm probably bad at everything I do, or I don't know what they think. I think a lot of it has to do with having good teams and good people working for me, like Antonio Fuentes, who manages my holding company, or the top management at Phone, or the people. I have a team that includes lawyers, accountants, analysts, and great people who help me. But I also think that I have this inability or attention deficit disorder to just do one thing, and my life wouldn't work if I didn't take on these other responsibilities. And then I have my blog, which also keeps me busy, although I'm probably the person who takes the least time in writing a blog post who I ever met. Sometimes it shows in their quality. But in general, I have 300,000 people who read my blog, and obviously there is something to what I say. But when I write my posts, I just sit and write them. It's something. So I'm very fast at doing certain things, but I also have a problem. And then in the past, it's like when I sold Ya.com, I built this company, Ya.com, in Spain, that I actually sold to Deutsche Telekom. And it was a very profitable move, and everybody thought, of course, you just made so much money, you sold it. And greed is part of anybody's motivation. And I'm not going to say that I don't like to do these things and make money, but I do believe that there's some truth to the fact that when I sold Ya.com and I was managing Just and Ya.com, I sold it because I couldn't manage it anymore because I was so busy. I just had so many things to do, you know. So and sometimes I just burn out and I take 2-year vacations. I've taken already 3 2-year vacations in my life. So,
that's a nice idea.
Yeah.
So this might be a good time for one of those, for those who can afford it.
I take them after like crashes, like 2001, you know, 87.
But your point is a good one, though, about, you know, there's this great quote from Harold Janine, who was one of the first big conglomerate builders. He was the builder of ITT. And he said, the skill of management is achieving your objectives through the efforts of others. And when you talk about building a great team, I think that is a huge part of building a business. You know, if you're a small entrepreneur, you think of doing everything yourself. And as you grow a business, you start to think about, you know, how can I enroll other people in my vision? How can I get other people to carry the ball further than I could carry it myself? You hire people who are better than you.
The 2 jobs I do at Phone is I am the #1 salesperson, which is something, by the way, that in Europe people look down on. And I always tell people in Europe, there's nothing wrong with being in sales. Like, the concept of a salesman in Europe is pretty bad. And entrepreneurs, we all have to be salesmen, and we have to make the most important deals in our company. And that's very important. And the other job is a product designer. Like, I spend a lot of time designing the products, the Fonera. Now I'm looking at like the antennas I was looking recently that are ugly, although we sell them, so please buy them anyway. But they're really ugly, and I was looking at when I was a child, they had this thing called flower power, and I was looking at the flowers that were then flower power, and I thought, well, why don't we have a flower power antenna? And I asked the designers to come up with flower power antennas, things like that, that normally CEOs don't do, right? But I really like design, product design.
Well, I can think of at least one CEO who's very involved in design decisions and has been extraordinarily successful. I think people sitting in the front row with their Macs up will know who I'm referring to.
Yeah, Steve Jobs, yeah. Well, I'll take the comparison, not on the personality, but on the talent.
So, you know, you've been a serial entrepreneur. What made you move originally from Argentina to Spain?
Well, no, I moved from Argentina to the States.
Okay.
And I didn't move. They moved me. The fascist government of Argentina killed my cousin, David Varsavsky. It was a crazy time. They were getting people off high school and taking them on airplanes and throwing them in the middle of the sea. It was very sad. And Senator Moynihan in the States gave us, my family gave us refugee visas, and we went to the States. So I've always been very grateful to the United States for saving our family. And then after that, we stayed there in the States for many years. But I moved to Europe, and that's kind of the surprising move, that I moved to Europe for a year 13 years ago. So I came for a year 13 years ago. It's been a long year. And I really am very happy in Europe now. I think that, and I think what has happened in this crisis in the United States now, it's somehow proving that this inefficient, bureaucratic, old-fashioned system of government of Europe was actually pretty good, because America is beginning to look a lot like Europe. Not even in Europe now we want to buy shares in the banks and things like that. So there was a role for government. You know, when I left America, and when all these, you know, Reagan, Bush, all elected, when they saying the government is not the solution, the government is the problem, and this sense that about doing it, Europe is more fair, more equitable. It's a little less brutal, you know, in the treatment of certain citizens that I believe in America, you know, the medically uninsured and so on. So I was very happy in the States, but I felt at home in Europe, and especially in Spain, because Spain is the Argentina I wish I had, you know, like a civilized version of Argentina. I used to be ambassador of Argentina. I don't know if it shows for the things I say.
Yeah.
So I was happy in Europe, and I'll probably stay in Europe, but I still have a home in New York, and I go there every 2 months. And I just love both places.
Yeah. So did you learn to be an entrepreneur in the U.S.?
Well, I think, when you're an immigrant, many times, and even in the States, although in the States there's more openness to immigrants, but the established jobs are left for the locals, right? There's networks of locals that give each other jobs, and entrepreneurs are kind of a little left out, even though, like I said, in the States there's a culture. But when I became an entrepreneur in the 80s, it wasn't the typical, I was the 24-year-old entrepreneur, but now, last week I had Mark Zuckerberg stay. We hosted an event for him in Madrid, and I was with Mark, and he's 24. And those stories of the 24 super successful entrepreneur, whatever, didn't happen in the 80s in America. They happen now, and I used to try to get funding, and they would tell me, you're too young, there was more prejudice, but still, America was open for entrepreneurs. But I think, or to tell you an anecdote, the same bank that didn't give me a $40,000 job when I finished school gave me a $12 million loan, and they didn't even know it was the same bank, because I was applying for a job because my father had died and my mother was freaking out, and I was at the same time with my business plan trying to get the 12 million. And the same bank rejected me for a $40,000 job
story.
and got me the 12 million, and they never knew, and they,
So a little bit reminds me of Dan Lyons' fake Steve Jobs. He applied for a job being a sort of a blogger at Fortune, and they turned him down. And then some came out that he'd built this fabulous blog as fake Steve Jobs. And
yeah, I read it. Yeah, in the book.
So
yeah.
I realize we have just a few minutes left, but do we have any questions from the audience? If anybody has a question, jump up. We don't have mics, but
by the way,
right here in the front.
If there's no time for a question, my email is martin@fond.com. I'm just telling you, if you have a question, maybe I'll answer later.
So, a very quick question. So, identify yourself and maybe stand up.
I'm Simone Bonassi from Italy. I work for Amazon. My question is, what is the most successful thing that happened to your life? I mean, you are a big success, an entrepreneur of big success, but what is the nicest thing that you've seen in your life? Maybe.
Yeah, well,
so
the question, so I repeat it now, the question for here in the back, there's a gentleman, Italian gentleman who works at Amazon, and he's asking, what was the nicest thing that happened to me in my business life? Is that a good summary? And there were, of course, some quick successes, like investing 38 million euros in Yellow.com and selling it for 550 million euros 2 years later, or also building Jastel or Viatel, where I put 200,000 and I sold my shares when it was worth 1.2 billion 9 years later. But in terms of things that I had to turn around that gave me a lot of satisfaction, in the non-for-profit world, I had donated $11 million to the Ministry of Education of Argentina to create, to connect schools of Argentina to the internet, and then the default came, and the Argentine government defaulted on, lost my money, the money that I had donated to the schools of Argentina, and I was desperate, really, really, really worried about that. I mean, I already had donated the money, but I was really concerned that the money was just never going to make it to the schools of Argentina. And I started a campaign, almost a political campaign, a lobbying campaign. I spoke publicly about how important it was to connect the schools to the internet, to train teachers, to train students. And I was able to turn over 2 years, not over one night, over 2 years, the government of Argentina around, and other donors. And then in the end, we ended up raising over $100 million, and we connected most of the schools or high schools of Argentina to the internet. And the program is called edu.ar, and it's been a good success. And it was, for a while, it looked like it was really going to be an abysmal failure. And
That's a great story, and it really demonstrates the power of getting people behind a big idea. All right, I think we've got to wrap up. So thank you very much, Martin.
No, thank you for having me.